Podcasting with Integrity, Ethical Guidelines for Content Creation. Hello, and welcome back to Legit Podcast Pro. I am Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. And in today's episode, we're diving once again into the intricate world of ethics in podcasting and media creation. Why is this important? How does it shape our journey as content creators? Let's jump in and find out. My name is Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. This is Legit Podcast Pro, where we explore all kinds of questions around the legal, the business, the ethical side of the content creation business so that you can be bold in getting your messages out, achieving the kind of impact and influence that you want, and not have to worry about the legal and the business stuff and getting sued and those kinds of things. I'm here to give you the tips, the techniques, the advice, and the information you need to stay out of legal hot water and get your message out. So ethics in podcasting is about the moral principles that guide us, not just in what we do, but how we do it. In a medium where your voice can reach millions, trust is currency. And ethical podcasting isn't just a good thing to have, it's sort of essential to build a credible reputation. It's about being a voice that your audience can rely on, rain or shine. So let's talk about some principles here: honesty, integrity, fairness, respect, responsibility. This is all about the truthfulness of your content, respecting the rights and dignity of our guests and our audiences, and taking responsibility for the impact the podcast might have. Now, ethics and legality often get bundled together, but they're really not exactly the same thing. There are ethical dilemmas, there are commercial pressures, audience expectations, personal biases. These are just a few of the challenges that can make podcasting ethically kind of a tough nut to crack, but it really is crucial. So let's look at some key ethical concerns in podcasting. First, intellectual property. It is vital that we respect copyright, and we respect fair use when that's what's going on, and attribution. And sponsorship and advertising. You got to be transparent with those endorsements and advertisements and follow the rules of disclosure. That's not just a legal requirement, it's also an ethical one. After all, we want our audiences to know that they can trust us when we talk about a product, recommend something, or so on. And if they know that we have been paid for the message, that actually builds the trust because we've told them, hey, I got paid for saying this. They can then make their own decisions and they don't have to feel, gypped or taken advantage of later on if they buy the thing without that underlying knowledge. Privacy is another big area. Handle sensitive information and guest consent and listener data with the utmost care. You don't want to be sharing stuff around that people don't want shared, and so it's a matter of respecting people's privacy and the rights of their data. Misinformation. As podcasters, we have a real responsibility to make sure that we're providing accurate information and that if we do make a mistake, we go back and correct it at some point. Our audience relies on us to be truthful with them, and we have to deliver that with the utmost integrity. And honestly, I don't care what kind of a podcast you're doing, whether it's a comedy or a fiction podcast or whatever. Coming at it with truthfulness in mind is important. Now, if you're doing fiction, then obviously you're not telling the truth, you're telling a story, but the audience knows that it's fiction, or they should know that it's fiction. If you're doing comedy, make sure they know you're joking and that you're not just talking trash about a person. And when you are, if it's factual stuff, you need to separate that out and be clear where the boundaries are when you're doing comedy, when you're doing parody or humor, and when you're doing something other than that. Ethical dilemmas and the gray areas that sometimes come into conflict in these things, not always very clear-cut. We're balancing freedom of speech with the potential harm, handling controversial topics and guests, and the line between entertainment and misinformation. Challenges we face every day, and with new technologies that are coming out, it's become even more challenging. Deep fakes are a reality. We need to be careful. If we're creating AI-generated content, I think we need to tell our audiences that what you're hearing or seeing isn't real. It was made by a machine. It was made by artificial intelligence. It might not be accurate because it came from these AI tools that we know can, the computer science folks call it hallucinating. It's just getting the facts wrong. Navigating political and social issues especially can be a real tightrope walk. If you're going to do it responsibly with an ethical compass, you can traverse these tricky paths while maintaining integrity and the trust of the audience. Now, implementing some ethical practices is really the best strategy to do this. So how do we do that? Well, having a personal or organizational code of ethics is a really good start. Set a standard for yourself and your team and anybody else who's putting stuff out in your name or on your byline or something like that. Use tools and resources to make sure that you're staying informed about ethical issues and that you're doing the research to verify the truth and the integrity of the things that you're sharing on your podcast. Remember, legal considerations are closely tied to ethical practices, but this is about doing what's right, not just what's legally permissible. And in fact, there are some circumstances where doing what's right is illegal and doing what's legal is immoral or unethical. So we do have some negotiating with our minds to do in this kind of a thing. If you stay within the bounds of the law, you're usually okay, but there are some things that are legal that just ethically don't quite sit right with folks. And so you want to be thoughtful and careful about those kinds of things. So let's look at some real-world examples of ethical challenges that have come up in the podcasting space. Now, as it just happens, last week I did a presentation about true crime podcasting, and there were a handful of examples of situations where podcasters got into a little ethical hot water, and one of them involves plagiarism. It is not copyright infringement when you take someone else's ideas and the way they've organized things, but you put them into your own words. But it does constitute plagiarism. And in the literary world, in the academic world, it isn't a bad thing, plagiarism. So it's fine to use other people's material as source material for your own work, but you really should do your own legwork as well. Aggregating from multiple sources, verifying things rather than just, in the case of one true crime podcaster, I'm not going to name names, but in case of one of them, they were accused of just basically just taking a particular journalist's columns that covered a particular story and basically following that outline and adapting those columns into spoken word narrative for a podcast. That journalist and a number of other podcasters came out and said, hey, that's not right, that's not cool. And those episodes actually ended up getting taken down. So that's one example of not quite copyright infringement, but still unethical. Another area is where a particular podcaster trash talks a political figure and is saying things that are questionable and certainly call this person's character into question. And it's perfectly reasonable to do that. In fact, I would say we have an ethical duty if we know someone has been engaged in some kind of shenanigans or doing something they shouldn't. Well, I think we have an ethical responsibility to call them out and bring that to the public's attention. On the other hand, we need to be responsible in how we do it and not just relying on rumor and hyperbole and inference. We need to go and do the research and ask the right questions and verify. And, journalists have very strict codes of ethics about truthfulness, integrity, transparency, and those kinds of things. And one thing that journalists do is if they can't corroborate a piece of information from multiple sources, either they don't report it or they report it as questionable content coming from just one source or something like that. And there's actually a legal privilege in defamation cases called the fair report privilege when the subject matter of the conversation is a matter of public concern. So that's useful. So these are the kinds of things that can teach us valuable lessons about the importance of ethics in our field. Here's another example, pay-to-play podcasting. When you are host a show that is popular enough that people are excited to get on your show and they're willing to pay, well, I guess it's okay to charge them money to have them come on as guests on your show. But I think it's also necessary that we give a disclosure, that we're transparent about that fact with our audience. So the audience knows, hey, I'm not an endorser of this person. I'm having them on my show as a guest because they're paying me to have them on as a guest. I think if you don't share that information, that they've paid to be the guest, then the audience isn't fully informed. And it seems like you're either endorsing or at least giving them a platform, and that gives them some kind of credibility. So I think it's incumbent on those of us that are doing podcasts that are getting pay-to-play deals. I think it's incumbent on them to to disclose that fact, just like you would disclose if you're using an affiliate link and promoting a product that you're going to get paid when somebody buys, or that you've got a sponsored message or something like that. The law says we have to do disclosures in some of these instances, and I think ethics takes it a little further. Ask yourself the question, would I be insulted or feel betrayed as an audience member if I later found out you got paid for something and you didn't tell me and you promoted a product or a service or a person or something like that? If your answer is, yeah, it might be, I think then the ethical thing to do is make that disclosure. Recovering and improving after an ethical lapse is also a crucial skill to develop. This isn't just about making amends, but also learning and evolving as a creator, as a podcaster, and as a person. And it's just about doing the right thing, ultimately. So as we wrap up this episode, I just want to recap our journey into the world of podcasting ethics. This is about building trust, maintaining integrity, being a responsible voice in the creator community. So thank you for joining me on Legit Podcast Pro. I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. I'll see you in the next episode where we'll explore another fascinating aspect of podcasting. But before I go, I just want to ask you, if you haven't already done so, please jump on over and sign up for my coming up workshop. I do this workshop from time to time, and it's coming up very soon. It's called Business and Legal Fundamentals for Podcast Growth and Profit, and you will learn a number of tips and techniques and strategies for setting up your podcast in the most business-like way. You'll learn the mistakes people make and how to avoid them, and get yourself all lined up to do great things with your show, have the impact and influence that you want, and get on the road to profit. So head on over to event.podcastlaw.net. That's event.podcastlaw.net, and check that out and register, and I'll see you real soon inside that workshop. But for now, that's it for this episode of Legit Podcast Pro. See you next time. Have a great week.